Here's the first video then in figuring out how we're going to utilise this ETS 3151 1995 Elu table saw to make it a modern day monster. And we're going to start off with figuring out how we're going to mount this in the table saw casing that we're going to make, because I think we're going to need to look at whether we're looking at pivot points or trunnions. I'll explain all that in this video. Let's get into it. So thanks for coming back to the channel. I'm Dean, this is Woodwork Journey, and like I said in the intro, we're going to start working on this bad boy. Now I'm going to just clean it up, we're going to take apart some bits and bobs so we can see what we're working with, and then I'm going to figure out whether we're going to go with a pivot or a trunnion system, which I'll explain to you in a little while if you don't know, because I think particularly with the tilt we may be going with a trunnion, yeah, so that I'll explain in good time. But first of all, step one is going to be giving it a bit of a clean up, giving this is the blade guard, so we'll be getting this off, however that comes off, and then after that what we're going to have to do is figure out what we need on the inside, what we don't need on the inside, and all that sort of stuff. And if you're particularly taken by my snug fitting fat bastard look, then it's really cold. It's gone up 2 degrees. It's now 4 degrees in the workshop, but it's all about the layers. Unfortunately, with an athletic body, you look a little bit rough. Let's carry on with this. I'll change the angle so we can see a little bit better. As I've shown you before, this is the ETS 3151 Saw King from Elu, back from 1995. I know I've repeated that more than once, but I love it. And we've got to see about taking this apart. Now I've got it on my movable MFT station at the moment, so I can hopefully show you things, but my workshop is incredibly full. So right here, we've got an Allen key, we've got one of those each end. We'll take that off first. All right, it's got to be one of these fellas. Let's go for... Oh, nailed it first time! I got these and oh, it's a 5mm. I was about to say, they don't say what size they are, but that clearly would have been a massive lie, because they do. Don't know if this is on camera, but this is on the other side of it. I'll take that off. That means that. I think if I take really should have figured out what's in frame. If I take the power supply off first, that's just a couple of Phillips screws. I might actually change this out to the system that I've got on my other saw that I put on, because it's nicer than this, but we will see. We may have to completely de-wire this. Well, I'm pretty sure we will have to completely take all the wires apart and what have you, but we can worry about that when we get to it. It works on basically like a scissor lift, which is very similar to what you'd have in a car jack, really. Don't know why we've got that spacer just running around by itself. That might have been in the middle at some point. I don't know. But the way it works is that is the blade going down, so out of the table in this instance. And yeah, that's pretty much all the way at the bottom. I mean, that's relatively smooth. It was real tight when I was doing it originally, because I hadn't had a chance to sort of put anything on the threads, but now I've done that. That seems to have helped. But let's take that back up again. These are not Acme threads. These are just like a real coarse thread going on, which generally on a table saw you'll find that you use Acme threads because they're sort of a faster moving thing and they're a little bit more, a little bit tougher. But that works, so that lifting mechanism is fine. So that's cool. Now then, what we've got here is the tilting mechanism, and that I think is going to be a problem. So the way this mechanism works is we undo that locking bolt there. This, it doesn't actually do anything. This is just like a handle to help you lift it, and then the whole thing just will sort of turn over like so. Now you haven't got anything on the other end. This is it. Absolutely all there is to keep the thing in place. Now, it's pivoting off a section just here and on the other side. And I think we can make that better by using trunnions. Let me explain more. Right, so how a lot of table saws work is we've got a pivot point. We've then got the body of the saw, and then we've got a pivot point there. Now, they are held in place under the table because they're attached to the table. And so if you're looking at it kind of from that angle, it would go down like that, and that would allow the saw to go up like so. Do you know what I mean? Because those are the pivot points there and there, and then looking at it from head on, that's the pivot point there, and that's allowing the whole thing just to pivot up like that. Now, the problem with this is when this pivot point is under the height of the table, so like for mine, I'm going to be putting like 18mm ply on there. That's going to mean that when this moves up, that the angle of the dangle, the angle of the blade is not going to be in the same place, because that's going to come up right there, because that's in line with that, right? But because we're pivoting from here, when we do that to pivot it to 45 degrees, the blade's then coming out this way. So you can see that we've got quite the gap going on right there. Does that make sense? And when you've just got a real thin piece, it doesn't really make any difference. You can just have a sort of a small throat plate with a slightly larger opening, and that's fine and dandy. But when you're thinking about using larger wood, then it becomes quite the problem. And so that's when we have to think about doing something with what are called trunnions. Yes, it looks dodgy, but this is how I'm going to start making this trunnion system, so hopefully you understand how it works. So this is how you begin making it. So we've got a number of concentric circles going on right there, and we would have, say this ruler is an 18mm worktop, then we would want the pivot point being at the top of the worktop. Okay, you with me? So we would, if we draw a line there, like that, and then the bottom of here means that this section right here is our 18mm. Okay, so this is taken out of the equation, but what we want is what's going on under here. So there are our two main trunnions cut out. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut along the bottom of where the MDF top will start. Does that make sense? Stick with me. Stick with me. This section right here, that is a hole. Okay, so if we were to look down there, just kind of like that, you would see that, the hole, that, and then that. That would be the profile of what we've got going on right there. You with me? Does that make sense? So now this is essentially the female side of the slot. So this would go on the inside casing of the cabinet. This section in my hand right here is the male part, and it goes on the saw casing. So this is on the side inside of the cabinet, and this is on the inside of where the saw is. And so now that will allow this to run in that track like so. You with me? And because we've got that 18mm gap, it means that the pivot point is at the top of the table, which is up here somewhere, and this is making up for the fact that there's a gap between the two. Does that make any sense whatsoever? Hopefully it does. And I'm printing one off as well as going to be making one as well, so I can show you how it works in principle. But if you have this at the front and the back, that's how most cabinet saws will do their 45-degree tilting. Right, so what we have going on here is what I explained the first system to be. So this is the pivot point underneath the underneath there, like so, and that goes into here, and that allows this whole section to just pivot whichever way it's going, you know. But this table is really, really thin, so it means that the blade is going to pretty much pivot in the same place. Whereas if I put a top on that right now, then the blade is going to come down underneath the tabletop and need a much greater or wider throat plate. It's pretty scary when you think the fact that just this pivot on both ends is pretty much the only thing holding this absolute death machine from spinning out of control and taking your legs off. I could really have just taken these bolts off rather than undoing those ones, but we'll totally disassemble it and then we'll worry about it later. Exactly the same again on this side, and done. So that, and that's the bit we want to keep. The table, done. Right, so we've got the main gubbins with the motor unit on the table. Now I need to get rid of this, because what we've got going on right here, this is just the 45-degree plate. So we can see if we can get that off, because we're going to change that out. Oh yeah, monkey. If you're a company, by the way, that does those ratchet spanners, like these sort of things, and you want to send me a bunch, that'd be awesome. I'd use them a lot. That doesn't want to come undone. Tell you what, it might be freezing cold in this workshop, but certainly gets your pulse up. Wonder if I can use this for like a mitre gauge or something. I'm going to keep it just in case, because, you know, might do. This is going to be at the front. Okay, so this is going to be at the front of the machine. The box, or the case that I'm going to make for it, is going to have a trunnion system going right here. Okay, and that means that if it's one here and here, as long as the front to back of the box is the same as this, the trunnion will be marvellous. I then may attach a way of moving it underneath. I mean, I don't really need all of this at the bottom, although that might even be full of concrete in there. It's pretty solid. It's definitely just aluminium, but I think it's been welded around concrete or something, so it's a bit of weight that pulls the saw down. I kind of like this idea for the lifting, the rising and falling, and also by keeping this rise and fall system, it means that it can only run up and down on these bars. I don't know if there's bearings inside there. I'm going to be surprised if there is, but it means that dry lubing these bars and making sure that the threads are clean are going to mean that this moves up and down really easily, and I can attach a riving knife to here. I'll have to make a plate or something for that, as well as making the whole riving knife, but that might be fine and dandy. I may have to, I don't know if I'm going to have to slice out a little bit of this top section, but we'll worry about that later. It's a handy dandy little arrow there to show which way that the saw goes. That's pretty good. I think what I might do is just give it a bit, try and give it a bit of a clean up, just to get rid of some of this, just because it looks horrible. Don't know whether it'll work or not, and it's completely unnecessary, but it gives me a chance to have a sit down and rest as well. So I'm going to do that, and then we will come back to figuring out how we got. That's a left-handed thread on there as well. But no, I couldn't have moved this onto my other saw, because this is a direct drive. There's no belt involved or anything like that. The motor is literally on the other side of this. That wouldn't have worked on my other saw. Right, that direct drive is also a bit of an issue when it comes to the height, but we'll worry about that when we get there. So yeah, I'm going to clean it up. We'll come back in a minute. Okay, I've given it a bit of a clean up. I've used regular PTFE spray because I've run out of dry lube, or I can't find it. And now it just works like an absolute champ. It's so smooth. So yeah, that's pretty awesome. So I'm happy with that. So now what I've got to do, I've just got a couple of little bits to clean out in there, and then that'll be that done. But yeah, I am going to start measuring up the box now. Hands up if you miscalculated the crap out of something today. Look at the gap! So this is the table saw enclosure, and I've got trunnions that I 3D printed. I designed and printed those, didn't take them into account, but I made the side panels. So now we have this gap, and I don't even know if the trunnion's going to work yet, but look at that. And I've got so much chaos everywhere else in the workshop that trying to cut the other panels now is just going to be a massive pain in the bum. Otherwise, though, I mean, it's looking pretty sweet as far as a sort of a container for a table saw goes, or a cabinet saw, because this isn't going to be attached to the table. This is going to be attached to the cabinet. Ooh. Still doesn't get away from the fact that I've got a hoofing great gap, and I've got to recut those bloody panels now, though, does it? What a pain in the ass. I'm going in. I can't cope. Ooh, grumpy. Right, I've had another idea. Now, in order just to get this working, you'll see there's no gap there. And what I've done is taken the trunnion idea off of it. So basically, I would drill through here, and that would go into that hole going right there. And there's exactly the same on the other side. And that would pivot in between the two. So, I've still got the rise and fall, and I've got to have it low enough so the tilt would still work without the top kind of getting in the way. But I wouldn't get the full cut height even, and it wouldn't quite be the same. But I would probably have a working saw, and so then I can get things a bit tidier, but also it means that that's the V1. I can then work on understanding trunnions to do the V2. What do you think? Are you ready to see something cool? Not got the tilt in yet, that's why there's no hole there, but it's not being supported by anything. And whoa, look, you can't see. It's really difficult to tell. But it's going up. It's going up. If I go the other way, you might be able to tell a little bit easier. But it's now going down. Slowly, because there's a million threads on this. But it is going down. Oh, would you look at that? So that's nice.